Rebecca Kersey Hickenbottom once watched her toddler climb over Shawn Michaels' unconscious body. She almost filed for divorce twice, once over his drug addiction and again after discovering his browsing history. She's now speaking out, and what you just heard is only the tip of the iceberg. Let's get into it. The Nitro girl who captured the Heartbreak Kid. In 1998, Shawn Michaels was broken. A back injury at WrestleMania 14 had forced him out of the ring, and doctors told him he might never wrestle again. The man who had defined showmanship in professional wrestling, the man who had superkicked his way to 4 world championships, spent his days at home in San Antonio, Texas, recovering and watching television. One night, he turned on WCW Monday Nitro, the rival program that was crushing the WWF in the ratings war. To understand the significance of this moment, you have to understand the Monday Night Wars. From 1995 to 2001, WWF's Monday Night Raw and WCW's Monday Nitro competed head-to-head every week for wrestling supremacy. The rivalry was brutal, personal, and all-consuming. Performers who jumped from one company to the other were treated as traitors. Information about creative plans was guarded like military intelligence. The two promotions poached each other's talent, mocked each other on air, and fought for every rating point as though the industry's survival depended on it. Shawn Michaels had been one of WWF's biggest weapons in this war. His matches with Bret Hart, his leadership of D-Generation X, his championship reigns that drew millions of viewers, all of it had helped WWF claw back ground against WCW's initially dominant NWO storyline. But now he was sidelined, watching from the couch as the war continued without him. That is when he saw Rebecca Kersey for the first time. She was performing as Whisper in the Nitro Girls, a dance troupe WCW had assembled to boost ratings during commercial breaks. The Nitro Girls were meant to keep audiences engaged between matches, but on this particular night, they captured the attention of the most theatrical performer in wrestling history. Michaels, in his autobiography, Heartbreak and Triumph, described the moment with characteristic directness. He called her the most beautiful, sexiest woman I had ever seen. He had dated models, danced with celebrities, and lived the Heartbreak Kid lifestyle to its fullest extent. When he says Rebecca stopped him cold, it means something. Rebecca Kersey was not a wrestling fan. She had entered the entertainment industry through dance, leveraging her skills to land a spot with the Nitro Girls without any awareness of who Shawn Michaels was or what he meant to the WWF universe. She was simply a dancer doing her job, unaware that a man watching from San Antonio had just decided she was the one. Michaels obtained her phone number through a mutual acquaintance. Reports vary on who made the connection. Some sources point to Rich Minzer, a gym owner in California who served wrestlers from both WWF and WCW. Other reports suggested Kevin Nash or Scott Hall, two of his closest friends who had defected to WCW, made the introduction. Their first conversation lasted hours. It stretched past 4 a.m. as two strangers discovered they had more in common than either expected. These late-night phone calls became a routine, continuing for 2 weeks straight. They discussed personal histories, future aspirations, family backgrounds, and spiritual beliefs. Rebecca had been raised Southern Baptist in a household where faith was not negotiable. Early in their conversations, she asked Michaels a question that would prove prophetic. Did he believe in Jesus? At the time, Michaels did not have a good answer. He had grown up nominally religious, but his adult life was filled with self-destruction, so he deflected the question as best he could. After 2 weeks of marathon phone calls and emails that stretched into the early morning hours, Rebecca flew to San Antonio for their first in-person meeting. Michaels picked her up from the airport, nervous in a way he had not been since his earliest days in the wrestling business. He took her to a Denny's for their first meal together. Not a fancy restaurant, not a celebrity hotspot where paparazzi might snap pictures. Their chemistry solidified immediately. The courtship moved with stunning speed. Within weeks, Rebecca returned to San Antonio for a photo shoot related to her dancing career. Michaels drove her to the airport when it was time to leave. As she walked toward her departure gate, something inside him clicked with absolute certainty. He chased after her through the terminal, weaving past travelers and luggage carts, until he caught up with her. He confessed his love. He proposed marriage. She said yes.
I ended up asking her to marry me in like 6 weeks, and then I think the entire time was like, 2.5 months we were married. And people are like, holy cow, that was fast. fat.
On March 31st, 1999, they married at the Graceland Wedding Chapel in Las Vegas. The only witness was an Elvis impersonator. No family members, no wrestling friends, no elaborate ceremony. Just the couple, a chapel employee dressed as the king of rock and roll, and whatever paperwork Nevada required to make it legal. This was during the Monday Night Wars, when WWF and WCW competed for every rating point and storyline advantage. A top WWF star marrying a WCW performer created immediate professional complications. Eric Bischoff, WCW's president, was furious when he learned about the relationship. He viewed the romance as a potential security risk during the ratings battle. What if Rebecca passed information about WCW's creative plans to her WWF-affiliated husband? When Rebecca approached him about leaving the Nitro Girls, Bischoff initially refused to release her from her contract. Negotiations eventually produced a compromise. Rebecca would be released with a 3-year non-compete clause, preventing her from joining WWF's programming. She accepted these terms and never returned to wrestling in any capacity. Her brief career as Whisper ended so she could become Mrs. Hickenbottom. Michaels' own family opposed the marriage. His mother and close friends believed they had moved too fast, from phone call to marriage in roughly 3 months. They worried about impulsiveness, about the rebound factor. Michaels had been divorced from his first wife for 5 years, about whether Rebecca truly understood what she was getting into. They were not wrong to worry. 6 weeks after the wedding, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. Cameron Cade was born on January 15, 2000. Their daughter Cheyenne followed on August 19, 2004. The marriage survived. It survived challenges that would have destroyed most relationships. But what it survived, and how, is the reason Rebecca's revelations about her husband remain so chilling decades later. The addiction that nearly destroyed everything. Shawn Michaels' substance abuse did not begin with Rebecca. It did not begin with his back injury. It began in 1986 when the wrestling business still operated in smoke-filled arenas and windowless bars where young talents learned to destroy themselves one pill, one drink, one line at a time. He was 20 years old, a rookie wrestler working shows in Las Vegas. The money was sparse, sometimes $100 a night, sometimes less. The crowds were small, and the future was uncertain. Young wrestlers survived on dreams, and whatever substances helped them endure the grind. One night, Michaels won $750 gambling at a casino. For a young wrestler, making less than that per month, it felt like a fortune. He could have sent the money home to his family. He could have invested it in wrestling gear or training. Instead, he spent it on cocaine. That single decision marked the beginning of an addiction that would consume the next 16 years of his life. By the mid-1990s, the Heartbreak Kid was using everything available to him. Alcohol in quantities that would hospitalize normal people, painkillers prescribed for injuries, and then consumed recreationally, steroids that enhanced his physique but corroded his judgment, and party drugs that circulated freely through wrestling's underground economy. His friends enabled him, not out of malice, but out of solidarity and their own participation in the same culture. Triple H recalled wheeling Michaels to hotel rooms on luggage carts because he was too impaired to walk. Members of the clique would check on him every hour through the night to make sure he was still breathing. This was considered normal. This was how the wrestling business worked in the 1990s. When Michaels met Rebecca in 1998, he was already deep in addiction. When they married in 1999, she did not fully understand what she was walking into. She knew he had a reputation for partying, but there is a difference between knowing something intellectually and living with it daily. When Cameron was born in January 2000, Michaels was at his absolute worst. Rebecca watched her husband pass out over dinner multiple times a week, his face falling toward his plate mid-sentence. She watched him collapse on the living room couch in a pill-induced haze that lasted for hours. She waited. She prayed quietly in the closet, begging God to change the man she had married, the man she still loved despite everything, the man who was disappearing into a pharmaceutical fog while their infant son grew in his crib. Then came the moment that changed everything. Cameron was approximately 2 years old. On this particular day, Shawn Michaels was unconscious on the couch, another unremarkable episode in an endless series of them. Cameron climbed onto his father's body. He had done this before, presumably. The semi-conscious form of his father had become furniture, something to be navigated rather than interacted with. The boy looked at his mother with the innocent confusion of a child who does not yet understand what he is seeing. He said, "Daddy's asleep." That image, a toddler treating his father's drug-induced stupor as normal, as simply sleeping, broke something in Rebecca. It would eventually break something in Shawn as well, though not immediately. The addiction was too powerful for a single moment to shatter it, but the seed was planted. Michaels later described crying in the bathroom mirror, staring at his own reflection, realizing he was not just destroying his own life, but actively harming his son's childhood. He was creating a pattern of absence, even while physically present. The next morning, Michaels confessed everything to Rebecca. He told her he wanted to quit. He told her he was ready to change, and he did. Cold turkey. In 2002, Shawn Michaels stopped using drugs and alcohol entirely, relying on prayer to manage the lingering back pain that had started his dependency cycle in the first place. He returned to WWE that same year as a transformed performer. But the addiction to substances was not the only demon he faced. There was another problem, one that almost ended the marriage permanently. Rebecca discovered Shawn's browsing history on their home computer, adult content, pornography. The details of what she found were never publicly disclosed, but the nature of it was clear enough. She confronted him directly, the way she always did. Michaels denied it at first, employing the reflexive dishonesty of someone caught in addiction. But Rebecca did not accept his denial. She called a lawyer. She packed her bags. She took Cameron and left the house. The next day, she returned, not to reconcile, not to forgive. She came back to explain, in explicit detail, exactly how his actions had hurt her, to articulate what he had done to their family, to their trust, to everything they had built together, to make him understand in terms he could not dismiss or minimize. Michaels listened. He promised to stop. He claims he kept that promise for over 15 years. In his book, Wrestling for My Life, he wrote about this moment with unusual clarity for a man who spent his career mastering the art of performance. I love Rebecca, always have loved her, and not wanting to break her heart again motivated me. From that moment, we started down the road to strengthening our relationship. Rebecca's role in his recovery from both addictions cannot be overstated. She had gifted him a Bible and devotional book for Christmas during his lowest period, when she was still praying in closets and watching him pass out at dinner tables. She never demanded he read it. She never lectured him about faith or salvation. She simply provided the resource and waited. The punch heard around the wrestling world. By 2008, Shawn Michaels had completed one of the most remarkable personal transformations in professional wrestling history. The man who had been wheeled to hotel rooms on luggage carts was now sober, faithful, and fully engaged as a father. He had become the kind of man who turned down lucrative WWE contracts so he could attend Tuesday night Bible studies with Rebecca. Consider that for a moment. Shawn Michaels, the sexy boy, the heartbreak kid, the showstopper, turned down money and fame to study the Bible with his wife. Rebecca's influence had fundamentally altered his value system, but wrestling still called, the ring still beckoned, the adrenaline of performing in front of thousands of fans, the creative satisfaction of telling stories through physicality, the legacy building that comes from working with the best in the business, none of that disappeared simply because Michaels had found faith. He was a different man, but he was still a wrestler at his core. And in 2008, WWE Creative decided to incorporate Michaels' family into one of its most personal and emotionally charged storylines. The feud was between Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho. On paper, it looked like a standard rivalry between two technical masters who had worked together before. Jericho had returned to WWE in 2007 after a 2-year hiatus, and a program with Michaels seemed like an obvious main event attraction. Both men were in their late 30s, both were considered among the greatest workers in wrestling history, and both could deliver the kind of match quality that justified premium pay-per-view placement. But what developed went far beyond a typical wrestling feud. It became something deeply personal, something that blurred the lines between character and reality in ways that made audiences genuinely uncomfortable. Jericho played a villain who attacked everything Michaels represented, not just his wrestling accomplishments, but his entire post-recovery identity. He mocked Michaels' faith, calling it weakness and hypocrisy. He targeted Michaels' family, using Rebecca and their children as emotional ammunition. He even exploited a legitimate eye injury Michaels had suffered. The angle required genuine emotional investment from both performers. It required Michaels to show vulnerability on a level he had never displayed before, to present himself not as the cocky heartbreak kid who could superkick anyone at any time, but as a man with things to lose, a family, a reputation, a hard-won sobriety that critics still questioned. And it required Jericho to be genuinely hateable, to cross lines that wrestling villains typically respected, to make audiences forget they were watching a performance and feel authentic disgust toward the character. At SummerSlam 2008, the feud reached its climax in a match that would become legendary for reasons nobody anticipated. Rebecca was positioned at ringside as part of the storyline, the devoted wife watching her husband fight for his honor against a man who had systematically dismantled everything they held sacred. The match built toward a confrontation involving her. During the climactic sequence, Jericho wound up to throw a punch at Michaels. The plan was simple. Michaels would duck, Jericho's fist would pass harmlessly over his head, and Rebecca would sell the near miss with appropriate fear. Contact was choreographed, but minimal. Michaels ducked. The punch landed squarely on Rebecca's face. This was supposed to happen. Contact was part of the plan, but the execution went wrong. Jericho's fist connected with more force than intended, at an angle that maximized impact rather than minimizing it. Rebecca's lips split open. The blood was real. Medical personnel rushed into the ring as the crowd gasped in genuine shock. Backstage, tension exploded into controlled chaos as WWE personnel tried to assess what had happened and how badly she was injured. Chris Jericho was terrified. He had just punched a woman, not a trained professional wrestler, but a civilian who had never taken a bump in her life, hard enough to draw blood on live television. She was the wife of one of the most respected and protected men in the locker room. Jericho did not know how Michaels would react. He did not know how the locker room would react. He did not know if his career was about to end over an accident. Rebecca sat up on the medical stretcher. She looked at Jericho, blood still visible on her face. She said, "It's okay, Chris. I'm a Kersey, I'm tough." That single moment demonstrated who Rebecca Kersey Hickenbottom truly was at her core. Not a victim, not a bystander dragged into her husband's world against her will, not a delicate flower who needed protection from wrestling's physical realities. She was a woman who had survived her husband's drug addiction, survived finding her toddler climbing on his unconscious body, survived discovering browsing histories that led her to contact a divorce lawyer and could take a legitimate punch to the face and comfort the man who threw it. Jericho later reflected on the incident in interviews, noting that it created a lot of animosity from people in the locker room initially. Some wrestlers were protective of women being involved in physical angles. Some were protective of Michaels specifically. The situation could have escalated into genuine backstage heat that damaged careers and relationships, but Rebecca's response diffused everything. From playboy to family man. Before Rebecca entered his life, there was another Shawn Michaels, a version of the man that wrestling fans remember with complicated nostalgia, brilliant in the ring, destructive everywhere else, and seemingly incapable of distinguishing between the character he played on television and the person he was supposed to be in real life. The Heartbreak Kid persona was not merely an act, it was a lifestyle that Michaels embraced throughout the late 1980s and 1990s. The sexy boy entrance music was not ironic when it blasted through arena speakers. The arrogant swagger that made him one of wrestling's most captivating performers was not something he turned off when the cameras stopped rolling. He was the Heartbreak Kid, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the consequences of that commitment would haunt him for decades. His first marriage was to Teresa Lynn Wood from 1988 to 1994. The marriage lasted 6 years and ended amicably, with no children and no public drama. Whatever happened between them remained private, a rare accomplishment in an industry where personal business routinely became public entertainment, and wrestlers seemed constitutionally incapable of keeping their disputes off camera. But during and after that first marriage, rumors swirled constantly about the Heartbreak Kid's romantic exploits. The sexy boy persona was not entirely fictional. Michaels lived his gimmick with enthusiasm that concerned even his closest friends in the clique, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Triple H, and X-Pac, men who were hardly strangers to excess themselves. The most substantiated affair was with Tammy Sytch, known to wrestling fans as Sunny. In 1996, while Sytch was in a relationship with fellow wrestler Chris Candido, she and Michaels engaged in a 9-month affair. This was not rumor or speculation based on secondhand whispers. Sytch herself confirmed it in her autobiography and in multiple shoot interviews over the years, providing details that left no room for alternative interpretation. The affair created immediate and intense locker room tension. Candido knew what was happening. The other wrestlers knew what was happening. Everyone saw Sitch and Michaels together at after-parties and in hotel bars, their relationship barely concealed despite its supposed secrecy. But nothing was done. This was simply how the wrestling business operated in the 1990s, when personal boundaries were suggestions rather than rules, and when top stars like Michaels enjoyed protection that insulated them from consequences. Michaels even weaponized the situation for storyline purposes, demonstrating either remarkable shamelessness or a complete inability to recognize irony. During his increasingly heated feud with Bret Hart, he accused Hart of improper behavior with Sonny on live television, using the implication of infidelity to escalate their rivalry. The accusation was hypocritical on a fundamental level. Michaels was the one actually involved with Sitch, but hypocrisy had never stopped him before, and would not stop him now. These affairs and entanglements predated Rebecca. They belonged to a different Shawn Michaels, the version who used cocaine recreationally and then compulsively, who passed out at dinner tables while his friends watched helplessly. But darker allegations surfaced much later, demanding examination even as they resist definitive resolution. In 2021, Vice's documentary series Dark Side of the Ring aired an episode about the infamous plane ride from hell, a chaotic 2002 WWE transatlantic flight that featured intoxicated wrestlers and multiple incidents of misconduct that would have ended careers in any other industry. The episode included interviews with various wrestling figures who shared stories about the industry's toxic culture, painting a picture of an environment where excess was not merely tolerated but celebrated. During that episode, Brutus Beefcake casually mentioned allegations that Michaels and his former tag team partner Marty Jannetty had used H-bombs, Halcyon, a sedative, on women during their time as the Rockers in the late 1980s and early 1990s. The implication was disturbing, that the Rockers had used these drugs to incapacitate women for sexual purposes, a practice that would constitute serious criminal behavior regardless of wrestling's permissive culture. The internet erupted with outrage immediately after the episode aired. Social media demanded accountability from both Michaels and WWE. Wrestling forums dissected every detail of the allegations, cross-referencing them with other stories from the era. Suddenly, the beloved Heartbreak Kid was being discussed alongside the industry's most predatory figures. Then Beefcake backtracked, and the story became even more complicated. Within days of the episode airing, he posted on social media that the story was just an urban legend, comparing it to absurd tales about other wrestlers, like Andre the Giant's various bodily function stories or Brian Knobb's legendary flatulence in front of Miss Elizabeth. Beefcake claimed he had never actually witnessed such behavior, positioning his original comment as recycled hearsay rather than first-hand knowledge. The retraction raised as many questions as it answered. Why would he share something so serious on a nationally distributed documentary if it was merely an urban legend? In February 2024, Michaels addressed the allegations directly during a media call for NXT Vengeance Day, offering the most comprehensive response he had ever provided. He said, "I've never shied away from the stupid stuff I did in the past. If you go back and ask Brutus Beefcake, he'll tell you. 1, never seen any of that actually happen. Again, wrestling stories." He's also retracted that after saying it. Michaels emphasized that all his encounters with women throughout his career had been consensual, drawing a clear line between the reckless behavior he acknowledged and the predatory behavior he categorically denied. He attributed the persistent rumors to the nature of wrestling's storytelling culture. No formal charges were ever filed regarding these allegations. No victims came forward publicly to corroborate Beefcake's original story. The claims remain in the realm of wrestling lore, unproven, denied, retracted by their original source. Wrestling's shattered marriages. Shawn Michaels' story of addiction, near divorce, and eventual redemption is compelling precisely because it is not unique. Professional wrestling has produced a graveyard of broken marriages, shattered families, and public scandals that make the Hickenbottom story look almost wholesome by comparison. The wrestling industry is structured in ways that make healthy relationships almost impossible to maintain. Performers leave home on Friday and do not return until Tuesday, only to leave again on Thursday for the next round of shows. They spend more time with their fellow wrestlers than with their spouses and children. They experience intense emotional and physical highs in front of thousands of screaming fans, then return to hotel rooms where the silence is deafening. They are surrounded by attractive people who understand the unique pressures of the lifestyle, people who are available and willing when spouses at home are distant and frustrated. Consider the case of Hulk Hogan, the most famous wrestler in history, and perhaps the best example of how the industry's pressures can destroy even the most celebrated families. Hogan's 26-year marriage to Linda Claridge ended in 2009 amid accusations so serious they shocked even wrestling's jaded fan base. Linda filed for divorce in 2007, citing repeated infidelity throughout their marriage. The most damaging accusation, that Hogan had conducted an affair with Christiane Plant, a close friend of their daughter Brooke. Linda detailed her experiences in a 2011 memoir titled Wrestling the Hulk: My Life Against the Ropes, painting a picture of a marriage defined by broken promises and calculated deception. She described physical abuse, Hogan tearing his shirt in fits of rage, throwing furniture across rooms, pinning her down with his massive hands around her throat during arguments that escalated beyond words. She characterized him as a sex addict and a compulsive liar who had betrayed their family repeatedly, while presenting himself to the public as a wholesome American hero who told children to say their prayers and eat their vitamins. The public Hulk Hogan and the private Terry Bollea were two different people, and Linda had been married to the one audiences never saw. A 2012 sex tape leak involving Hogan and Heather Clem, the wife of radio host Bubba the Love Sponge, further destroyed his reputation. The tape's publication by Gawker Media led to a landmark lawsuit that ultimately bankrupted the website, with Hogan winning $140 million in damages, which was later settled for $31 million. The legal victory was celebrated in some quarters as a blow against invasive journalism, but the victory could not restore his family. Their daughter Brooke eventually cut contact with both parents after years of family dysfunction, exhausted by the drama that had defined her entire adult life. Hogan married twice more, to Jennifer McDaniel in 2010, divorced 2021, and to Sky Daly in 2023, but the damage to his family legacy proved permanent and irreversible. He died in July 2025 with relationships still strained and his children estranged. Consider Edge, born Adam Copeland, one of the most successful and celebrated performers of the Attitude Era, and a man whose romantic history became wrestling's storyline in the most uncomfortable ways possible. Edge married 3 times, with the first 2 unions collapsing amid infidelity that WWE exploited for programming purposes. His first marriage to Alana Morley, sister of fellow wrestler Val Venis, ended in 2004 under circumstances that remain disputed but clearly involved the breakdown of trust. His second marriage to Lisa Ortiz lasted barely a year before collapsing in 2005 due to Edge's affair with Lita, which had begun while Lita was dating Matt Hardy. The love triangle became one of wrestling's most infamous real-life scandals, a situation so messy that WWE decided to incorporate the genuine pain into their television programming. Hardy discovered the affair and publicized it online, breaking the fourth wall in ways that violated wrestling's unwritten rules about protecting the business. WWE responded by firing Hardy temporarily for his transgression. Then they rehired him so they could turn the entire situation into an on-screen feud. Edge eventually found stability with Beth Phoenix, whom he married in 2016 after both had experienced the failures of previous relationships. They have 2 daughters and remain together as of 2026, apparently having learned lessons from their respective pasts. Then there is the darkest case of all, Chris Benoit, a cautionary tale about what happens when the industry's pressures combine with untreated mental illness and brain damage accumulated over decades of unprotected head trauma. Benoit divorced his first wife Martina in 1997, shortly after their daughter's birth, to pursue Nancy Sullivan, the same Nancy who had left her husband Kevin Sullivan for Benoit during a wrestling storyline that became real. The affair began as fiction, an on-screen romance designed to generate heat for a feud between Benoit and Sullivan. Nancy and Chris married in 2000 after both had destroyed their previous families to be together. For 7 years, they seemed like a wrestling success story. 2 people who had found genuine love through the artifice of professional wrestling, proof that real connections could emerge from fake storylines. In June 2007, Benoit murdered Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel before hanging himself from a weight machine. The tragedy shocked the wrestling world and prompted investigations that revealed severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, in Benoit's brain, damage accumulated from decades of unprotected head impacts, of diving headbutts and chair shots, and the routine violence that wrestling fans consumed without considering the long-term cost. The pattern repeats because the conditions that create it remain unchanged. Fame amplifies personal flaws while providing cover for them. Travel enables and encourages infidelity by creating distance from accountability. Physical punishment leads to painkillers that dull more than just physical pain. Painkillers lead to addiction that compounds every other problem. Addiction leads to broken families, public scandals, and sometimes tragedy that echoes through generations. Shawn Michaels fits this pattern perfectly until he broke it. His marriage to Rebecca has lasted over 25 years, making it one of the longest-lasting successful unions in professional wrestling history. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.